Carla Zaccagnini, who's actually Argentinian, so technically Argentinian, but moved to Brazil at a very early age, so studied in Brazil, is considered a Brazilian artist, and who is now based in Malmo. Yeah, she's been based there for a couple of years now, yeah. But someone who also has a very international trajectory.
I'm going to talk only about one project, not only because we have limited time, but also because it's something very recent. It has just turned into a book that I saw for the first time right now, so I'm very excited about it. It's very present in my mind. But it is also, I think, it has to do with the moment we are living in Brazil. And at this moment, that's what I want to talk about. This here is the government program of the actual, the current president that we have. And it's called A Bridge Towards the Future. The idea of Brazil as a country of the future, or Brazil, the land of the future, is almost an axiom, an automatic announcing, something like Paris, City of Lights, or New York, the Big Apple. Some would say that the idea of Brazil as a country of the future is due to the nationalist pride. Por que me ufano do meu país? This book. This is why I boast my country. Written by the Count Afonso Celso in 1900. The book was a mandatory reading in schools for 50 years. Curiously enough, its first edition has an English epigraph that reads, right or wrong, my country. This book doesn't state the famous sentence, but it concludes, we are still a daybreak. We will necessarily reach the brightness and the heat of noon. We don't have the right to ever feel discouraged. It is our duty to always trust. To feel discouraged in Brazil is an injustice, ingratitude, it is a crime. Hope among us is to become not a virtue, but a strict civic obligation. The first book, titled Brasil, País do Futuro, Brazil, Land of the Future, is published in Amsterdam in 1909, written by De Leeuw, who was then the Netherlands Vice Consul in Rio de Janeiro. In 1912, Henry Schuller, who had also been a consul in Brazil, publishes his own Brazilian Ein Land der Zukunft, Brazil, Land of the Future. The Italian geographer Francesco Bianco, who accompanied his country's delegation during the celebrations of the 100 years of Brazilian independence, published Il Paese dell'Avvenire in 1922. In 1928, a leaflet titled Brazil, Future Land for Jewish Immigration was published in Berlin by 3 international organizations dedicated to the support of Jewish refugees. And in 1936, Hermann Ullmann, a German journalist, comes in a Zeppelin to write Land of the Future, a journey in Brazil. But it is Stefan Zweig's Brazilian Ein Land der Zukunft, originally published in 1941, that guarantees the consolidation of this honorary title. The Austrian writer Stefan Zweig disembarked in Rio de Janeiro the previous year, 1940, running away from the war and willing to write the Brazilian book, as he announced in a telegram from New York to his local editor Abraham Coogan from Guanabara Publishing House. Zweig had already been in Brazil 4 years before, exactly 4 years, by the way. He anchored in Brazil on August 21st in both occasions. This is him here in 1936, before disembarking, in company of the Minister of Foreign Affairs representative. The first time in Brazil in 1936, he stayed for 12 days, visiting Rio and São Paulo. In that occasion, he presented a lecture in a symposium that also counted with the presence of Count Afonso Celso, author of the already mentioned Por que me ufano do meu país. Despite of this being the biggest local editorial phenomenon at the time, we can't know for sure if Zweig has had contact with the book. What we know is that it was then that he first mentioned to his Brazilian editor that he would like to write a book about the country. And we also know that in these reports of the trip, later published in the international press, he states, Whoever sees the Brazil of today has launched a look towards the future. Back to Europe, when Austria is annexed by Germany, he leaves to England and becomes stateless. He could not hold the passport of a country that was publicly burning his books. He then applies for British nationality and at the same time for a residency permit in Brazil. He becomes an UK citizen, but when Germany starts to bomb London's surroundings, he lives with his wife Lotte to New York, from where they follow to Rio. Even before disembarking, he states to some journalists that he has come to finish his book about Brazil. Brasil, País do Futuro, the book, is then the result of an escape, an optimistic annunciation born from fear, a shelter. What we don't know for sure is how much the book is an implication of asylum. In a trip to Buenos Aires for a conference, Zweig and Lotte visit the Brazilian embassy. By explicit telegraphic order from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, their passports are there stamped with permanent residency visas, dispensing with the obligatory documentation required for such. Doubtlessly too simple and fast, I can say by my own experience with Brazilian bureaucracy, and especially at a time when countless European refugees were coming to that shore. Not only did they have their visas issued on the same day and without presenting the otherwise compulsive documents, Zweig and Lotte were also released from the obligation of staying in the country, being free to come and go as they pleased. His book about Brazil was then finished in the United States, where the couple settles from January till March 1941. It is from there that the manuscript is sent to Guanabara Publishing House. It is also from the US that he coordinates the almost simultaneous publications of several editions: Brazilian, North American, German, printed in Stockholm, Swedish and Portuguese, all released in 1941, and British, French and Argentinian in the beginning of 1942. The now legendary title was suggested by the English translator, inspired by an epigraph chosen by the author. The epigraph is a fragment of a letter written in 1868 by the Austrian diplomat Count Proquest Osten, then serving in Brazil, and addressed to the French philosopher Joseph Arthur Gobineau, who was then hesitating about accepting the post of ambassador in the country. The fragment that opens Zweig's book says, "A new country, a magnificent harbor, a detachment in relation to our petty Europe, a new political horizon, a country of the future, with an almost unknown past that invites the scholar to research, a splendid nature and the contact with new exotic ideas." One should say, as a parenthesis, that the original In Terre d'Avenir could also be translated as a land or a country of future. And it's also worth noticing that the indefinite article in, kept in the German title Ein Lande der Zukunft, is removed from the Brazilian editions until 2006, when a new translation is published, from a land of future to country of the future. The Portuguese, French, North American and British editions also removed the article, País do Futuro, Land of the Future, Terre d'Avenir. The most famous work by Joseph Arthur Gobineau, addressee of the letter, is his essay on the inequality of the human races, one of the first racist treatises published in 1855. Gobineau ended up accepting the diplomatic office in Rio. He arrived in 1869 and stayed for little more than a year, establishing a lasting friendship with the Emperor Dom Pedro II. But Gobineau saw the future of Brazil as rather black. He was convinced that racial miscegenation would lead the country to its ruin. The only salvation he saw was the encouragement of European immigration for the widening of the country's population. If instead of reproducing among themselves, he writes, Brazilian population was in the condition of subdividing even more the harmful elements of its current constitution, strengthening through more valuable alliances with the European races, the movement of destruction that can be observed in its lines would conclude. Nice. The unfortunate choice of the epigraph was not the author's single tactic mistake. The back cover of the North American edition quotes a telegram from Mr. Lorival Fontes, director of the Department of Press and Propaganda, organism of communication and censorship during Getúlio Vargas' dictatorship between 1930 and 1945. When mentioned in the Brazilian press, the inclusion of this passage in the back cover of the US edition instigated the rumors of the book having been commissioned by Vargas' government. During his first trip to Brazil, Zweig had personally met with Vargas. In an interview to A Noite newspaper given on August 26, 1936, he refers to this encounter. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of being received by the president, Dr. Getúlio Vargas, and I was fascinated by the way he welcomed me, without any kind of formalities. It was as if I was visiting not the country's highest authority, but a colleague in the Republic of Letters. The polemics was also incited by the foreword to the first edition, written by Afrânio Peixoto, whose only preoccupation seems to be to convince the readers that the author has written it all for free, according to a review by Newton Braga, published in August 31st, 1941. In fact, Peixoto says, not even the implicated propaganda, either national or foreigner, has ever talked so well of our country, and the author doesn't want for this a handshake, not even a thankful acknowledgement. Love without retribution. It is known that the Department of Press and Propaganda organized Zweig's research trip through the country in January 1941. Lourival Fontes' secretary personally made the arrangements, and a reporter working for the government, Dalmeida Vitor, accompanied the couple during the whole trip. For these or other reasons, the reception of the book was harsh. No one dares to openly accuse the author of his involvement with the dictatorship, as this would mean also to accuse the government for their part in a supposed deal, but the writer's political detachment is questioned. Dalmeida Vitor, the same reporter, publishes a reply interview in Zweig. In 40 years of literary life, I am proud to never have written a book for other reason than that of artistic passion, and never aiming for any personal advantage. Some reviews, as that of Eloy Pontes for Globo, recriminate the book's content, particularly its analysis of the Brazilian people. Pontes ends stating that Zweig's warnings about the lack of intensity in our way of living and a sort of laziness numbing everything and even dulling the mind is all already reported in all books by Debré, Rugendas, and Gobineau. It's interesting to notice that Zweig's praise can already be read as belonging to the same sphere as Gobineau's racist writings. There is no time today to discuss the content of the book, but I can say that there is a central thesis about the nature of the Brazilian people in its pages. Quoting, under the imperceptibly relaxing influence of the climate, people develop less impetus, less vehemence, less strong a vitality. It is in this lack of power produced by heat, it seems, it is this lack of power produced by heat, it seems, that carries the promises of a future generation, future civilization in which humanity will live in peace, not as the result of a worked out or fought for solution of injustices then, but due to a natural dissolution of strength, a sort of melting of potency. Zweig concludes his introduction by saying, one of our greatest hopes for future civilization and peace in our world rests in the existence of Brazil, whose desires are aimed exclusively at pacific development. Wherever ethical forces are at work, our task is to strengthen these intentions, and that is why I am writing this book. This is why Zweig says he wrote Brazil Land of the Future, or A Land of Future. I want to end this talk by explaining why I decided to read this book a few years ago. And it is because I have seen this sentence arising again, sensing an euphoria of those who think that the future is finally approaching. As we see, this is not the first time in the country's recent history when it is thought that this promise will finally be fulfilled. I am trying to understand what are the conditions that surround this belief. hoping the most critical won't be repeated. This is a magazine ad from 1970s, and it reads, "Until 1964, Brazil was only the country of the future, and then the future arrived. 1964 was the year of the military coup in Brazil, a coup that led to 20 years of dictatorship, repression, exile, torture, and assassination. During Obama's speech at the Cúpula Empresarial Brasil Estados Unidos in 2011, he said, "They used to say that Brazil was the land of the future. This future has arrived." So here we are now.